Okay, so we've found a z-score for a given confidence level, and we found the margin of error for a given confidence level. And now we want to actually get to creating the confidence intervals. We're going to start with this situation. We want to estimate an unknown population mean mu. So we don't know mu. We're trying to estimate it or capture it with this confidence interval that we're building. And in the first scenario, we know the population standard deviation sigma. So we're given that bit of information. If the population is normally distributed, so if we have that information, or the sample size is at least 30, we can use a z-interval. We're going to start where we have the point estimate, the sample mean x bar. Okay, so we've taken a sample and we've got our sample mean. We're going to use it and what we know about the population standard deviation in order to create a confidence interval. In order to create the confidence interval for any confidence level, use the above steps first to find the margin of error. So we're basically going to start where we just were. We're going to first find that margin of error, and that requires us to use an Excel command along with some other work. Then, once you have that margin of error, we can go back to steps that we've had before. When we have the margin of error, all we need to do is add and subtract that to the sample mean x bar, and that creates the confidence interval. You can do this subtraction in Excel, or in this case, you're allowed to do that step by hand. Either way is fine, because again, Excel, where that came into play, was finding that margin of error. It already came into play in the problems right here. And as a reminder, just remember your interpretation structure. When we interpret these confidence intervals, what we say is we are blank % confident, this is where that confidence level is, how confident are we, that the true population mean for mu, and again, say whatever context it is that you're speaking about, is between, and then give your lower and upper limits. And if you always just say it in this way, you will always be interpreting that correctly. If you sort of go off script and try to say it in your own words, you may be off, okay? So the exact terminology is important here. We're going to create the 90% and 98% confidence intervals for the prior question and write out our explanation for each one. Notice which one is wider and does this match what we've already learned. So we have already done step number 1 in the creation of these confidence intervals. We've already found the margin of error, so we're just going to steal that work from above. So when I make my 90% confidence interval, I'm going to start with the fact that the margin of error that we found was 0.857. Now just remember, when you're doing one of these from scratch, you will have to go through those prior calculations and find that first. But since we already did that, we're just going to steal it. Okay, then in order to create the confidence interval, we simply do x bar minus the margin of error, comma, x bar plus the margin of error. So let's see, we've got the margin of error. Let's scroll back up and remind ourselves, what was x bar? We have to be given that information, or we have to calculate it for ourselves, but in this case, we were given that information. X bar in this case was 73. That was the sample mean. So I'm going to remind myself over here that x bar is 73. So creating this interval, we're doing 73 minus 0.857 for the low limit and 73 plus 0.857 for the upper limit. And then doing those calculations quickly, we get 72.143, comma, 73.857. So there's my confidence interval. Now, if you're asked to interpret this, this is where I would go to that sentence structure, and I would say something like, we are 90% confident that, okay, what is our population parameter mu here. What were we talking about? We're talking about scores on exams in a statistics class. The mean score of these exams is this population mean that we don't know. So I'm 90% confident that the mean score on all of these stats exams is between 72.143 and 73.857. Okay, now let's make the 98% confidence interval. I would have to calculate this margin of error from scratch typically, but we're just going to go grab it. It was 1.213. So again, I'm going to, in this case, make my interval by the lower limit being 73 minus 1.213, comma, upper limit 73 plus 1.213. And doing those calculations gives us a lower limit of 71.787, comma, upper limit 74.213. So there's my confidence interval. And then when I explain this one, I say we are 98% confident that the mean score on all of these stats exams is between 71.787 and 74.213. And if you look at those intervals closely, you should notice that the 98% interval is in fact wider, which does match what we already knew and what we were already expecting to happen.